Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Weekly Review. I'm your host, Paul Hazard, and joining me this week, we have Lucy Newberger, Shanika Edwards-Head, and John Gibbs. Good morning to you all.
Morning.
Good morning.
Lucy, thank you very much for stepping in last week. I wasn't able to make it, just late notice. Brilliant job. Thank you very much. What a week it has been. The four main political parties in Northern Ireland are all led by women now. Northern Ireland offers mobile phone guidance, bringing the UK into line with many other countries across the world, including Portugal, Spain, France, in banning mobile devices throughout the school day. And Ofsted's filthy laundry is emptied out faster and smellier than a 14-year-old's rucksack on their return trip from an Interrail. Anyway, on the show this week, we have 3 great stories making the news and 4 fantastic shows to help make your commute a breeze. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with our first story after these messages from our sponsor.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Welcome back. One of the stories that caught my eye this week is pay-as-you-go schooling. Now, more and more schools are being hit with austerity, and parents are being asked to pay money for their children going to school. 38% of parents nationally are being asked to pay money. That rises to 61% in London. And I'm ashamed to say 70% of parents in Northern Ireland are asked to pay money. And a whopping 10% of parents are paying £30 per month. Shanika, if I could come to you first, you're at the sharp end of austerity in a primary school in North London.
Yeah.
What does this feel like on a day-to-day basis?
It just feels like we have limited everything. And actually, I just feel like our children deserve so much more. Obviously, we should have to ration a bit, but what we're doing at the moment, I just don't think it's fair for the children. I think, they talk a lot about trips in that article, and I could fully relate because every school I think I've ever worked in, it's like we can't afford to go on trips if we don't have the money, if parents can't contribute to the trips. And there's been some cohorts where a lot of parents just haven't been able to contribute. And actually, I feel sad they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to put forward a lot of money, but I remember one year we couldn't go to London Zoo because, parents just couldn't afford to, to put the money forward. But then I was like, my class have missed out on that experience. The Science Museum is great, but we always take them to the Science Museum. Let's give them a bit of something different. So actually, I just feel really sad about all of this. And actually, parents shouldn't be felt they shouldn't be made to feel ashamed as well, or like I just feel it's really sad, very sad. But I truly do agree with what was being said there. It's happening.
Yeah, it's definitely happening. Yeah. Bridget Phillipson tells us that she's committed to resetting relationships with education and the workforce. Now, she's not the Chancellor, but do you think she can influence the autumn budget, Lucy, and get some money for education?
I do. I do, and I hope so, because I mean, the sort of the vibes and the energy and the sort of feelings I'm getting are that Labour are very much into, and certainly we heard a lot about this when they won the election, was, you know, the energy, the money is going to be going into public sector services, and schools being one of them. It is also one of those things, though, that, you know, you'll believe it when you see it. So obviously we don't get the budget until I think it's October time. So once it's there in black and white and we see that the money is there, then I hope so. I mean, at the moment it is difficult to say, but she seems very committed. She seems the person who seems to be very much behind schools and behind the education system. So I can only hope that the budget does actually reflect what she's saying, and that we don't have to be asking parents for money to support school trips or resources in schools.
And I think, as Shanika says, our children deserve it.
They deserve better. Absolutely.
Yeah. John, one of the things the articles point out is that some schools are very subtle in how they ask parents for money. There are voluntary, there's little reminders and so on. Other schools are naming and shaming parents. I mean, is this how it should be? You know, should we be putting parents under such pressure to contribute to what should be free?
No, I mean, obviously not. School should be a rich experience. And when you do that thing where you've been teaching enough decades that you see kids in the school, you see young people in the street who you taught 10 years before. They can't remember a thing about half the lessons you taught them, but they remember that trip you went on. Yeah. They really remember that trip and the experiences you had that day. It was a museum in London, or it was off to Washington, D.C. I used to take a group to Washington 10 years in a row. We did this trip. It was cool. Teaching politics A-level. We went off to Washington and it was great. But every year, there was an agonizing bit where you knew that all the class should go. But there'd be a couple of kids who just say, well, I can't afford this. So you search around the school and you find some money here and you find some money there. And you felt guilty about doing it, because as soon as you were able to get all the kids to go to Washington, you knew that there were some kids who had afforded the whole thing because the family had struggled, but they got the money together. I don't really object to communities supporting schools. I don't mind when people volunteer, people help with school things. But when schools start asking, in the ways you've described, Paul, for money that is for essentials and for the rich experience that all kids should enjoy, then we've got something very, very wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so, yeah. And Shanika, just to finish this story, I think you, in your school, you have some very novel ways of making sure that essentials are there for your children every Monday morning. What are the things that you do?
Wow. Good old Twitter/X. I'm always on there scouring for a little competition. There's always something which is, I used to be a bit embarrassed. Now I don't care. So sorry if you do see that. Because actually, recently or last term, I managed to win 200 glue sticks for my school, which, I remember telling my friends and they were like, what? Like, what's that? And I was like, that's everything for us. And actually most schools, everyone is lacking in glue sticks, and especially good quality glue sticks as well. Yeah. So I actually, I'm looking out anything that I can find for free. Any businesses that are doing anything and giving stuff away, which, I guess I shouldn't be, but this is where we are. And I think the fact that I'm entering these competitions, but I see so many other educators entering, shows where we are at the moment.
Well, you're very good to do it, and good luck with all your competitions.
Thank you.
Do you name your glue sticks?
Sorry. No, do you?
You're going in a very surreal direction there, Paul.
Well, as you might have seen Lucy's reaction there, that's a kind of an in-joke, because Hannah Wilson, who is not with us this morning, is a very big fan of naming glue sticks. And at the end of the lesson, when one of the glue sticks hasn't been returned, Hannah has been known to walk up and down the aisles of the classroom shouting, "Where's Charles? Where's Charles?" And someone is much more inclined, apparently, to find and return a glue stick when it's named. So I just wondered, do you name your glue sticks, Shanika?
I don't at the moment, but I might start to. My first one will be named Paul. There we go.
Or a glue stick.
Great. Okay, so on to our second story. Now, another story that caught my eye this week is a very serious story that is about social media contagion. Recent years have seen an improvement in the area of under 18s receiving unwanted and harmful content on their social media threads. Noticeable in particular is the drop in content promoting eating disorders and self-harm. Now, that's great to see. But Ofcom, the regulator, claim that there is no reduction and possibly a rise in the harmful, often violent and misogynistic content that boys receive on their phones. And a spokesperson for Ofcom has told us, once exposed to harmful content, it becomes unavoidable. John, this is happening. And, you know, in a number of reports, children are telling us they don't want this on their feeds. Social media companies don't seem to be taking responsibility. They're blaming the algorithm. They're blaming software. I mean, surely a person who owns a company needs to be brought to book here.
Yes, I would like that to be the case, in a sense, because like everyone, when you hear these sorts of things are being seen by young people, your first reaction is, well, they shouldn't be. Somehow we shouldn't do that. But if you were to conduct an experiment and you were to say, look, let's release into the population almost unlimited access, not unlimited, but fairly easy access to pornography, to violent images, and to an overwhelming torrent of imagery that is to do with consumption and consuming and goods and self-image. What would happen? We are actually conducting that experiment. We didn't ask to conduct this experiment. We've been doing it now for the last, well, in one form or another for quite some time. Whether it's harmful, we'll find out. I don't know that you can put the genie back in the bottle. And I think an awful lot of we need to control the internet, we need to limit the internet, we need to bring people to account, is in order that we can establish that we're trying to do something when we really kind of know we're not. In the end, we live in that kind of society. It's late capitalism. It's the mass production of culture. It's where we are. We can't escape it. Whether it's harmful or not, time will tell. We don't live in the society where a glimpse of stocking was something shocking. We don't live in that anymore. We don't live in a kind of society where we live in a very different world, and it's continually being different. And we're going to find out what is harmful about. Millions of men returned from World War I having seen things that are appalling. Millions of men returned from World War II having seen things they could never, ever not see. What happened to them? Well, many of them were changed in ways good. We'll see.
Yeah.
That seems very fatalistic, but I don't think statements like we need to bring to book internet providers will work. And I think they're just masking the fact that we're allowing this to happen anyway.
I think you're very right, unfortunately. And the articles and panorama program that article comes from makes that very clear this week, that the tech gurus can hide behind an awful lot of software and legalese and living in different countries and so on. Yeah. Shanika, John draws some, really serious historical imagery and so on there. But, the ability or the fear that things will influence children has kind of always been with us. I know when I was growing up, there were fears that if you went to watch Bruce Lee films and you came out and you were doing your kung fu outside the cinema, oh, that was dreadful. You were going to turn into some kind of, killer or something like that. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
Can you shed any light on the implications of exposure to this kind of grave and serious content?
Well, it's just really shocking at reading that article, what these boys are being exposed to. Well, what all these children are being exposed to, but specifically that's what's focused on, the boys. And especially, I think myself, when I was thinking about ages, where you're supposed to be 13, but I know most of the children in my class are on social media, and cousins who are definitely not 13, and they're all on social media. So they're seeing these things. And the thing is, I think I see a lot of children becoming desensitized as well. They're desensitized to this graphic violence, to the misogynistic comments. They don't even realize, I've spoken to children in the past, they don't even realize what they are saying. It's, they're just so desensitized. So I just think this is really something we need to think about. It is actually really affecting our children. And I think as well, the cycle of it continuing, some children are not on social media, but you go to school, they pass it on, and they pass it on, and they pass it on. And some of the parents are like to me, but I don't let them, access this. I don't know where they're getting this from. But that's another thing. It's being passed on, their children are in school. They're passing on what they see. And sometimes they're not realizing how harmful it is, So it's just really sad and shocking and disgusting at some of the things that they're being, they can access and see. I mean, sometimes I'm scrolling and I see stuff and I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, I can't imagine how these kids are feeling when they're seeing some of these things that just pop up. So really harmful.
And interestingly, I suppose a number of children were interviewed for those articles and those programs, and the vast majority of them said they didn't want this content on their feeds. And I suppose there's something heartening in that.
Yeah.
Lucy, this is Teachers Talk Radio. We are teachers. And although governments seem to think we do have magic wands and so on, we are limited in what we can do. What can schools do to prevent or reduce the damage that's happening with this exposure?
I think, awareness, and we are aware. We are living this every day. We're also on social media ourselves. We're not necessarily exposed to the same content, but we are familiar with, and part of being a teacher is being kind of up to date on all of these things. It very much is just part of what we do now. I don't think we can be expected to wave a magic wand, but I do think we can support parents. I do think that we can, again, receive training ourselves. I mean, I often sort of say this as a solution to things, but I think, it needs to be a topic in staff meetings. It needs to be a topic that comes up and that is part of regular discussion amongst leadership and their teachers, because we are at the sort of proverbial coalface, if you like, when it comes to these things. We are dealing with it every day. I've had parents come to me and say, can you do workshops around TikTok, around Instagram, around things like that? And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I could, but, that there is sort of a lot that I don't know. I don't know about manipulating algorithms and things like that. But I do think being on side with parents and not, again, I talk about this a lot, where fingers often point in different directions. Well, why don't you just take the phone out of your child's hand? Yeah, you could, but that's a temporary fix. It's more about working together and understanding. We know this is going on. We know you're struggling as parents to deal with this and to support this. Let's see what we can do together to make sure that we are aware, that we are fostering discussions around this, that we're not shaming children if they come across something that they're not supposed to, that they know they have a safe space where they can come to a teacher or indeed a parent and discuss what they're seeing and feel sort of that, and know this is not okay, but we're going to make sure that you don't feel upset and sad about it. So I think it's an ongoing discussion, like all of these things are. But I do think bringing people together and not finger pointing and not being shameful about it. John, I can see is
Yes.
interrupt.
I just want to completely endorse what you've just said, Lucy. That phrase, an ongoing discussion, that's the most hopeful thing, because it sounds very we could get very depressed. Things ain't what they used to be. It's a terrible world we live in. But an ongoing discussion. You talk about misogyny, you talk about violence, you talk about sexuality with boys, you talk about what being a boy is in this kind of world and how their response to that is, and you do actually get somewhere. In 1963, the judge in the Lady Chatterley trial turned to the jury and said, would you want your wife or your servants to read this book? Now, we don't live in that world, and thank goodness we don't. Really, thank goodness we don't. We can all read Lady Chatterley now if we want, and it's just fine. So actually, the discussion and the moving on and the adapting is hopeful. I just thought that was a very hopeful note.
Yeah, we're all learning together. We're all, and maybe I'm sort of on my sort of whimsical, slightly hippified sort of stance on things, but I do feel that a lot of this would be improved with a more sort of open approach. And it is easier said than done. It's very easy for me to sit here and say it, but I do believe a lot of these things would benefit, not be solved necessarily, but benefit from that ongoing discussion.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's really exactly what education is. And that helps to feed into our next story. UNESCO, the United Nations Education and Science body, has for some time now been warning about smartphones in schools, recommended that they should be banned in order to tackle disruption and improve learning. Now, this week, Northern Ireland closed the circle in the UK, bringing all of us into line with Italy, France, Portugal, and Ireland in supporting a phone ban during the school day. Education Minister Paul Gibbons said, there is growing evidence that phones distract from children's learning, and restrictions which extend to break and lunch times can have a positive impact on academic achievement and engagement. Is this good news for everybody at long last, Lucy?
Yes, it is. I think that, yes, in part. I think that not having phones in lessons, unless specifically required, which it might be for media tech related lessons, that's fine. But lesson to lesson, you don't need it. Particularly, a lot of these kids are on laptops now. They're not even, they have tech readily available that they can use. There's no sort of real need. Certainly when, it's almost a cop out to say, well, when I was at school, we didn't really happen, but we didn't, or the phones we did have didn't have the capability that they do now. And we did fine. Break times and lunch times, I don't feel as strongly about, but certainly in class, if you can minimize the distractions, we're talking about, attention spans and things, particularly in the wake of COVID and all of that, and being able to focus in class. You don't need to have it there necessarily. And I know that Brent Poland, who is often on panel here, is a big fan of getting rid of them altogether. I think in break times and lunch times, fine, within reason. But of course, there are a lot of issues that come with children having their phones. There's various bullying issues attached to that. But again, I also think that the danger you might come into here is children say, well, why can't I have it? If you ban something, it almost incites that rebellion a little bit, and it kind of, children sort of like, well, what if you're taking something away from me? I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I can still have it. So maybe this initial ban is will be effective, but I do think that in time you're going to have to sort of come into another way of thinking, and maybe sort of how can we integrate them to an extent? How can we do this positively rather than just saying, nope, not having it?
I think, John, you won't be just as definitive there as Lucy, and you can certainly tell us about that. But maybe also tell us about, what obstacles and barriers are schools going to face in trying to implement a mobile phone ban?
It's really difficult. When I taught sixth formers, I would say to the students, put your phone down in front of you. Then we'd use them in class. I'd say, look this up, we'll use them. We're now, they're like having your own laptop with you, really, and they can do everything a laptop can do virtually. When I was teaching lower school kids, year 9, year 10, it was the rule in the school was if I saw it, I'd have to take it away. I didn't like doing that because, you imagine what happened. The kid sneaks his phone out, someone sent him a message, it bings under the table, then you try and take the phone off them. Well, that's a good bit of lesson time gone. I think in the end, they live in a world with phones, but schools will have to manage them. And a bit like Lucy was saying there, it's another one of those difficult things. It's not going to be easy, but if you have to talk to kids about it, they sort of understand that. And again, I could be sounding all wishy-washy, and I think Brent would disagree with me. But I think that we have to, in a sense, manage their use of this technology, which will be such an important part of their lives. So don't ban them. I think UNESCO have got it wrong. I don't like phrases like it mustn't be distracting. I was always being told at school I was constantly dreaming and staring out the window. It was one of those things that was a feature of my personality. I was away with the fairies half the time. Well, there you go. That's childhood. I don't let them be distracted sometimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Shaniqua, Naomi Long, who's the leader of the Alliance Party in Northern Ireland here, one of our 4 female leaders now, she says phones have an off switch.
Yeah.
Use the off switch. And that this is a pilot scheme that Minister Paul Given's running, and it's going to cost £250,000. It's a waste of money, she says. It's too expensive. Is she right?
I do agree with her. I think she also says, at a time when resources are so stretched in the public sector, this expenditure is hard to fathom. And I do agree. I mean, I know we're talking about different places, but we've been talking about how schools are just struggling with money in general. And, what the pilot was pushing, if I remember correctly, is magnetic pouches, which, I see that people have them for concerts where you put your phone in the pouch and then, it shuts throughout the day. So I understand the point of because I know asking children to put their phone away and it will come out. But that's what we need to work on. That is what we need to work on, getting children to just put their phone away. And actually, it will be hard. It will be a journey. I think about it myself. I always have to check my phone at some point throughout the day, even if it's at the toilet, and I just have to quickly before I go in, have a check. And I just think, I'm not a child. Sounds like yes, John. I'm not a child, or I haven't been a child in 2024. Things are very different. So, but I think we can use the off button. I think there are ways. Put them in a box, lock them, I don't know, in a room. But that's a lot of money for magnetic pouches, and we tell people to put their phones away, I believe. Just me.
Mm-hmm. And we have a listener saying John is an early adopter of mindfulness, obviously. Very good.
Absolutely. Completely
And he
early
agrees.
adopter of mindfulness. Where my mind was and what it was full of, I'm not sure.
Very last question on this, and it's either yes or no. With the ban coming in for students throughout the school day, would you apply the same ban to staff? Lucy?
Ooh, no.
John?
No.
Shaniqua?
No.
Oh my goodness. I think there'll be a lot of people watching this segment of today's program. So right after this, we'll be back with our shows of the week. Now, it's been a busy week, as well as government ministers coming back from partying in Ibiza through to 4 a.m. Clearly, teachers have as well, and they're back, they're well rested, and they're getting their shows together on TTR. Indeed, if you think you could be a TTR host, get in touch. We can make that happen. Lucy, what have you been listening to or watching this week?
So I listened to Chris Wilkinson's show. He talked with, and I'm just looking at the show notes just to check that I get his guest's name right. It was Afsan Redwan about overcoming the challenges of partial sightedness, and just very interesting because he is a leader now, and he has been on a journey through, multiple schools, different kinds of schools, independent schools as well as state schools. And it was just very interesting to hear how he's adapted, how he's learned to have a very successful career whilst also being partially sighted. So it's well worth a listen back. It's a short show. It's only an hour. So I'd encourage you to check that out.
Great. Thank you. John, what have you been listening to?
I listened to James Ragburn's late show on rethinking assessment. And it made me rethink assessment in the sense, two things about the show were great. One was the guest, Scott Hayden, whose own experiences of going through education, struggling with the way things were assessed, essays, having to write things down a lot. That 5-paragraph structured essay that is the cornerstone of so much of our assessment. And this, what they were doing, now he was an educator, he was in a technology college, and they were using digital means to assess in all sorts of different ways. Kids were making podcasts, kids were videoing themselves, kids were constructing and using AI. And they were using it in a way that was different to the old essay. I remember my daughter coming home from school and she'd been set an essay in PE. I said, well, what's PE? That's just running and jumping about. How can you write an essay about that? And she had to research some sort of game, hockey or something, and then write an essay about it.
You should be causing there, John. Yeah. Is out there that's going to be
running and jumping about.
My friend.
Not be assessed, can it really? Anyone can run and jump about.
He is just leaping and jumping about. Maybe let's not quote that.
Yeah.
And but if it was to be assessed, certainly an essay wasn't the way you could assess the running and the jumping about. This essay, this show really made me think again about imaginative technological ways of getting away from the way we assess kids.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'll be brief. I listened to Claire Bill's show this week. She had two principals on, Kate Obridge and the Normal Head, whom you can find on Twitter. A great listen in which you can really feel and get a sense of three principals who just take great joy in their work. Super show. Anybody interested in ever sitting in the principal's chair, you will learn an awful lot from listening to a 1-hour show. Just like all our shows, they're really free CPD. Yeah. Shanika, what about you? What have you been listening to this week?
Oh, you guys have all mentioned some great shows that I really need to listen to. But the one I'm going to recommend, it was Teacher Wellbeing Tips. And that was the late show with Hannah and Lucy. And it was great because it was sharing a range of wellbeing tips. And I felt like it was so important to start the year hearing some of those tips. Listening to the anecdotes, I was like, oh gosh, I can relate to a lot of it. Hearing about the cupboard of doom and actually hearing, about like working over holidays. And I think even talk about boundaries. And I think someone mentioned, advocating, I think it was Lucy, advocating for our ECTs. And there was just lots to think about. And I think that's something throughout the year. My well-being sometimes goes up and down because, I'm so focused on we've got this and this and this. So actually that was a great one to listen to. And actually, I feel like just so that we know we're not alone. So please do give it a listen.
Very important, very important. And we're not alone at all. And you can get even more contact with teachers by listening to our shows. Well, that's about it for this week. That's all we've time to. Thank you to our sponsors, John Catt and Fulcrum Careers. Many thanks to today's guests, Lucy, John, and Shanika. And a special thanks to Leanne in the background, who helps to make all of this happen. Have a great week. We'll see you all again next Sunday on the Weekly Review.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time. on Teachers Talk Radio.